The tarp came off the old sled with a sound like tearing paper, and 3 men stood around it not knowing what they were looking at. It sat behind the machine shed at the Whitcomb place, half buried in last year's hay chaff, faded red paint gone the color of dried blood, one metal runner bent just enough to notice. The wood box was cracked along one side and patched with a strip of tin somebody had nailed on 20 years back. A rope handle, gray and frayed, hung off the front like something that had given up trying to look useful. Dale Henson laughed first. He always did. "Lord, Clara, is that thing still around? I thought your Wyatt burned that in '91. Roy Mercer knelt down and ran a thumb along the bent runner. The kind of look a mechanic gives something he's already decided isn't worth fixing. This ought to go in the burn pile with the rest of this junk, or the scrap heap, if the metal's worth anything." Maggie Whitcomb stood off to the side in her canvas coat, 27 years old and sharp as a new blade, watching her aunt's face for a reaction. "Aunt Clara, we've got the ATV now." "We've got the calf box on the flatbed. Nobody's pulling calves by hand anymore. It's a nice piece of history, but it's not doing anybody any good back here." For Clara Mae Whitcomb didn't answer right away. She was 63 years old, built lean and weathered the way ranch women get when 40 winters have worked on them, the same way wind works on a fence post. She looked at the sled the way she looked at everything, slow, quiet, like she was reading something the rest of them couldn't see. "Leave it by the Calving shed," she said. That was all. No explanation, no argument. She turned and walked toward the barn like the matter was closed, and the 3 of them stood there looking at each other and then back at the sled, wondering the same thing. Why would anybody want that old thing anywhere near calving season, when everything they needed was parked 20 feet away with an engine in it? Nobody let it go easy. Ranch cleanup day always turned into a kind of trial for old equipment. Things got judged, and most things lost. Dale kept circling back to it over coffee in the shed that afternoon. "I'm not saying it to be smart, Clara. I'm saying it because I've got 2 ATVs, a 4-wheel drive with chains, and a tractor with a cab heater. There's nothing that Sled does that I can't do faster." "Didn't say it was faster," Clara said. "Then what's the point of it?" She didn't answer that either. She just picked her coffee back up and let the silence sit there, which was a thing she did that made people uncomfortable, though she never meant it that way. She wasn't being difficult. She just didn't see the use in explaining something before it needed explaining. Roy wasn't ready to drop it. "I get keeping equipment that still runs, but this thing doesn't run. It's a box on 2 rusted rails. What's it gonna do that the flatbed calf box won't?" "Get somewhere the flatbed can't," Clara said, and left it at that. Maggie caught up with her later, out by the calving shed where Clara had gone to check the heat lamps and stack fresh straw bales against the wall. Maggie had grown up 2 hours south, come to help her aunt the last 3 winters since her Uncle Wyatt passed, and she'd learned enough about cattle to know when Clara was holding something back. "You're not doing this because Uncle Wyatt built it," Maggie said. It wasn't a question. Clara straightened a stack of straw before answering. "No, then what? Every year, sooner or later, there's a calf born somewhere. The trucks can't reach in time to matter. Wind fills a draw, or the ground goes soft, or the snow gets deep enough that tires just spin. Happens most years. Some years worse than others. We've got the ATV for that." "ATV's got tires too," Maggie frowned, not quite following, and Clara didn't push it further. She just went back to stacking straw, the kind of unfinished conversation that would nag at a person for days, which was exactly the effect it had. 2 days later, Clara had the sled up on sawhorses in the machine shed, working on it under a single hanging bulb. She'd hosed off the chaff and dust, then gone over it piece by piece the way a person checks a saddle before a long ride. She pressed her thumb against the bent runner, testing how much give was left in the metal, then set to straightening it slow, a little at a time, with a length of pipe and steady pressure instead of force. She tightened every bolt she could reach and replaced 2 that had rusted past saving. The old rope handle came off entirely, cut away and thrown in the burn barrel, and in its place she threaded a new length of 1/2-inch rope, shorter than the original by nearly a foot. Maggie leaned in the doorway watching, arms crossed against the cold. Why cut the rope shorter? Seems like you'd want more length pulling a load. Longer rope's easier on flat ground, Clara said, not looking up. Shorter rope gives you more control going through brush or over rough snow. You want the sled close enough behind you that you can feel what it's doing, not way back there fighting you. She patched the cracked bottom board with a fresh piece of half-inch plywood, screwed and glued, then sanded down every rough edge on the sides where a calf's leg might catch or scrape. She checked the old leather strap that ran across the front of the box. A tie-down, worn soft and dark from age, oiled it, and left it in place because it still had years left in it. Fresh straw went into the bottom, packed down snug, enough to keep a wet calf up off the cold wood. A machine gets you there fast, Clara said, mostly to herself, testing the balance of the sled by lifting the rope and letting it settle. A sled gets you back when the machine won't. Maggie didn't say anything to that. She just watched her aunt work with a kind of attention she hadn't given the sled before, like she was starting to suspect there was more to this than an old woman being stubborn about her dead husband's tools. When Clara finished, she carried the sled out herself, one arm under the front lip, and set it against the wall just inside the calving shed door, close enough to grab without thinking. It looked almost the same as it had behind the barn, same faded red, same patched side, same old dents in the metal, but it sat different now, ready instead of forgotten. Calving season came on the way it always did in fits and starts, cows dropping calves across 2 weeks in ones and twos while Clara and Maggie kept the rotation going, checking the barn cows every 4 hours through the night moving pairs to the nursery pen, watching for the ones standing off by themselves with their tails switching the sign that meant labor was close. By the second week, 7 cows were left to calve, most of them heavy and close, udders tight and full, the kind of look that told an experienced eye these would come within days rather than weeks. Clara walked the pens twice a day now instead of once, counting bag fill and watching how each cow carried herself, because a rancher who waited for obvious signs was a rancher who ran behind all season. Then the weather started turning against them. It began as cold rain, the kind that soaked through canvas and chilled a person from the inside out. Clara kept the weather radio on low in the kitchen from the first gray morning, and the forecast held steady for a day, rain, then clearing, before the tone changed. By the second day, the rain had gone to sleet ticking against the tin roof of the shed like static, and the radio announcer's voice had picked up an edge Clara recognized from other bad winters. The careful way forecasters talk when they're not yet sure how bad something will get, but suspect it'll be worse than they're allowed to say outright. They're saying whiteout conditions by tomorrow night, Maggie said, coming in from checking the herd, snow already starting to mix with the sleet on her coat, systems dropping down out of the Dakotas, temperatures falling 15 degrees overnight, wind gusts up near 40. Wind gusts up near 40. Clara nodded and looked out the kitchen window toward the north pasture, where the fence line ran along a shallow draw that filled with drifted snow every hard winter, sometimes chest deep on a man by morning. She'd watched that draw fill and empty for 30-some years, and she knew exactly which storms it would swallow whole. There was one cow out there Clara had been watching for 3 days now, ever since the rain first started. A big-bodied red cow, older one that had calved late every year of her life, and she'd taken to standing near the far windbreak at the edge of the north pasture instead of coming in close to the barn like the others. Clara had walked out to check on her twice a day, noting the way the cow held her tail, the way her sides had dropped and hollowed just above the hips. "That red cow's not moving in," Clara said. "She's got another day or two probably. Cows do that. They like their spot. She's not choosing a spot. She's hiding." Maggie looked at her aunt, not quite understanding, but there was something in Clara's voice that made her stop arguing. Clara had been ranching long enough to read a cow the way other people read a face, and something about that red cow's stillness, the way she kept her body turned into the wind and her head low, told Clara she'd calve before this storm let up whether anybody was ready or not. By the next morning, the sleet had turned fully to snow, fine and dry at first, then thickening as the wind built through the afternoon. The mud along the pasture lanes, soft from the earlier rain, began freezing into hard ruts overnight, ground that would twist an ankle walking and swallow a tire wrong at speed. Snow started drifting against the north fence line by midday, piling deep in the lee of the windbreak, exactly where the red cow had planted herself. The first cracks started showing before the storm even hit full force. Maggie took the ATV out along the pasture lane that afternoon to check water tanks, confident as she always was on the machine, because most days it went exactly where she pointed it. Halfway across the flat behind the barn, the tires bit into wet, heavy snow that had drifted deeper than it looked from a distance, and the machine sank to the frame in a hollow no one could see until they were already stuck in it. The tires spun, throwing slush, and dug the machine in another 6 inches before she gave up and walked back for the tractor. Dale had come by to help move a few pairs closer to shelter, and his pickup fishtailed hard, pulling out near the north gate, back tires losing traction on ground that had gone from mud to frozen ruts overnight. He caught it, didn't slide into the fence, but it rattled him enough that he sat in the cab a minute before backing out slower. "Ground's turning mean," he said to Clara through the rolled-down window, snow already collecting on his hat brim. "Froze up hard under that slush. Chains'll help some, but it's not gripping like it should." The tractor made it into the north pasture far enough to check on the pairs there, but when Clara tried to push it toward the soft draw near the windbreak, the front end started sinking in ground that hadn't fully frozen beneath the snow cover, a wet spot that never quite dried out even in summer, no matter the season. She backed it out before it committed any further and left it parked near the gate, the tracks behind it already filling in with blown snow. The chain on that same gate had frozen solid by evening, ice welded into every link, and it took 10 minutes with a bucket of hot water just to work it loose enough to swing. By the time Maggie got the tractor free and back to the yard cold and frustrated, she stood looking at the stuck ATV still sitting out in the pasture, the ruts from the pickup. The frozen chain link still dripping where she'd thought it, and something in her started to shift, though she wasn't ready yet to say it out loud. None of it was catastrophic. None of it was anybody's fault. It was just weather doing what weather does to machines built to run on traction and clearance, tires that needed something firm to grip engines that needed dry ground or at least frozen ground, not this in-between mess of thaw and freeze that took away every advantage a machine usually had. Clara watched every one of those small failures without saying much, because she'd seen this pattern before and knew exactly what it meant. That evening, she carried the calf sled from the shed door to just inside the barn, closer to the house, and set it near the back porch steps. Maggie noticed and didn't ask why this time. She just stood there a moment looking at the old faded thing sitting in the porch light with fresh straw in its box, and something in her stomach told her the joke had already stopped being funny, even if nobody had said so out loud. The storm hit full force a little after midnight. Wind came first, a low, steady roar building into gusts that rattled the shed doors and pushed snow sideways past the yard light in sheets thick enough to swallow the barn 30 yards off. Clara was already awake, had been checking the barn cows every hour since dark, and when she stepped outside at midnight, the cold hit her like a wall, and the world past the porch light had gone completely white. The radio Maggie carried crackled just after 1 in the morning. "Aunt Clara, that red cow's down near the windbreak. I can see her from the fence. She's calved. Calf's on the ground, she's licking it, but Clara, it's not standing. Soaked through. Wind's hitting that whole side of the pasture. I'm coming. Don't take the AT-A." "We're not walking. We're pulling the sled." There was a pause on the radio, static hissing, and then Maggie's voice again, quieter, the memory of that afternoon's stuck ATV still fresh enough to change her mind before Clara said another word. They met at the barn, Clara already dragging the sled out from beside the porch steps, runners hissing softly against the packed snow of the yard. Maggie had the four-wheeler running anyway, engine idling, ready to argue the point one more time out of habit more than conviction. "Clara, we could still push through on the ATV, try at least. Ground out past the third fence post is soft under that snow. You'll bog same as this afternoon, except this time there's no daylight and no way to walk out for help." Clara was already fitting a headlamp over her stocking cap. We take the sled. It doesn't sink because it's not carrying its weight on 4 little tires. It rides the top. Maggie killed the engine. They went out on foot into wind that cut sideways and snow that stung any bare skin it touched. Clara out front with the rope over her shoulder and Maggie behind, steadying the back of the box so it didn't tip on the uneven ground. The sled slid low and quiet, gliding across crusted drifts that would have swallowed a tire to the axle, riding up over the soft spots instead of digging into them. It wasn't fast. Every 50 yards, Clara stopped to check the fence line with her headlamp, using the posts as markers in a world that had lost every other landmark to blowing white. "How do you even know which way we're going?" Maggie shouted over the wind. "Fence runs straight north from the 3rd post. Follow the fence, you can't get lost. Follow open ground in this, you can." Maggie took the rope for a stretch when Clara's arm tired, and felt right away what her aunt had meant about the shorter length. With the sled riding close behind her, she could feel every shift in its weight through her shoulder, could tell the second a runner caught on a hidden clump of frozen grass and correct for it before it dragged sideways. A longer rope, she realized, would have let the sled wander half a step behind her without warning, invisible in this wind until it was already tipping. It took almost 40 minutes to cover what would have been a 5-minute drive in clear weather, the two of them leaning into the wind. The sled runners cutting a narrow track behind them that filled in with snow almost as fast as they made it. They found the red cow standing over her calf near the windbreak, both animals half buried already. The cow's body turned to block the worst of the wind, but not enough. The calf lay on its side in the snow, small chest rising and falling too slow, its coat plastered flat and dark with birth fluid that hadn't dried, ice already forming in patches along its back. Clara knelt down fast, running her bare hand along the calf's ribs, feeling for the shiver reflex that meant the body was still fighting to stay warm. "He's cold. Not gone cold. Not yet. Can he stand?" No time to find out. Clara was already working, rubbing hard along the calf's neck and shoulders to get blood moving, then wrapping it in the wool blanket she'd carried folded under her coat, tucking it snug around the legs. "Bring the sled up close, straw side toward his back." They lifted the calf together, Clara taking the weight of the body while Maggie guided the legs, and set him down into the straw bed of the sled, tucking the blanket tighter around him. The old leather strap pulled across to keep him from sliding during the pullback. The cow bawled and pushed in close, nosing at the edge of the sled before falling in behind it, following as Clara took up the rope again, and the two women started back the way they'd come, this time slower. The extra weight of the calf dragging against the rope with every pull. The return felt harder in every way the trip out hadn't. Their own tracks had already drifted half over the wind, seemed to have picked up rather than eased, and Maggie's arms burned from the cold and the pulling both. She took a turn on the rope, halfway back, leaning her whole body into it, and Clara walked alongside, steadying the box, both of them working by feel more than sight in the blowing snow. The cows breathing loud and close behind them the whole way. Maggie heard it anyway and didn't answer, saving her breath for the pull. The lights of the barn came up out of the white, like something surfacing from underwater, and the last 100 yards felt longer than the whole mile before it, but the sled never once caught or dragged. Riding steady over the same crusted snow that had swallowed the ATV that afternoon. Inside the calving shed they moved fast. Clara had the heat lamp already hung and glowing over a fresh bed of straw, and they laid the calf down beneath it, howling off the worst of the wet before working in warmth through the coat with dry burlap sacks, rubbing hard along the ribs and legs the way Clara had taught Maggie her first winter on the place. The calf's ears were cold to the touch, cold enough that Clara checked them twice, pinching gently at the tips, and his tongue, when he finally worked his mouth open, was pale rather than pink, a sign Clara didn't like but had seen turn around before, with enough warmth and enough time. "He's not out of it yet," Clara said, keeping her voice even. "Get the colostrum warmed. Not hot, just warm. Bowl of hot water under the jug, not on the stove direct." Maggie moved without needing to be told, twice testing the temperature against her wrist the way Clara had shown her, and within 20 minutes the calf had lifted his head off the straw, blinking against the lamp's glow. then tried his front legs, wobbling and failing twice before getting up onto them long enough to nose toward his mother. The cow had been led into the shed by then, and she went to him at once, licking steadily at his back and flank, pushing him gently with her nose the way cows do when they're checking that a thing is truly alive and truly theirs. Clara called the vet clinic near dawn, more out of habit than urgency by that point, and Dr. Elaine Porter picked up sounding like she hadn't slept either. A busy night for every ranch in 3 counties. "Sounds like you got him warmed in time," Elaine said, once Clara had walked her through it. A wet calf out in that wind, no shelter, temperatures where they were. He wouldn't have had more than another hour, maybe less. Cold like that, the body just runs out of fuel trying to stay warm, and once the shivering stops, that's usually the end of it. You did right getting him in fast. "Wasn't fast," Clara said, "was steady." Elaine laughed, tired. "Steady got the job done. That's what matters." By the time the sun came up gray and thin over a yard buried in drifts, the storm had passed into a light, steady snow, and the world outside looked like something scraped clean. Dale showed up around 9, having dug his own driveway out with a blade on the front of his pickup, and found Maggie in the yard checking on the ATV, still sitting exactly where it had bogged down the afternoon before, buried to the frame in a drift that hadn't melted an inch. He looked at the machine, then out toward the fence line, where a single narrow track ran north into the pasture and back, barely visible, now filling in slow with fresh snow, but still there, cutting a clean line where every other set of tracks from the day before sat frozen and stalled. 2 sets of boot prints alongside it. "You went out on that thing," he said, more statement than question. "Wasn't a choice between fast and slow," Maggie said. "Wasn't a choice at all, really. Nothing else would have made it there and back both. Your truck couldn't have. The tractor couldn't." "This," she nodded at the buried ATV, "sure as anything couldn't." Dale didn't say anything for a while. He just looked at that faint track in the snow, then back at his own truck sitting fine in the yard now that the ground had frozen hard and even easy driving in daylight after the fact. It was a different thing at midnight in a whiteout, and he knew it without needing anybody to tell him. He didn't apologize, didn't make a speech about being wrong. He just tipped his hat back and said, "Well, good thing somebody kept it then," and went to help dig the addy out, which was its own kind of admission. Roy came by 2 days later to help patch a fence panel the wind had knocked loose, and when he passed the calving shed and saw the sled sitting cleaned and dried by the door, fresh straw, already packed in the bottom, he didn't say a word about scrap piles or burned barrels. He just nodded at it the way a person nods at somebody they'd misjudged and moved on to the fence, and that was the last anybody heard him call it junk. Clara never made a thing of any of it. She cleaned the sled the same afternoon she brought the calf in, rinsing off the wet straw, checking the runners for damage, oiling the leather strap again though it hadn't needed it, and setting it back exactly where it had been by the calving shed door. Not as a trophy, not as proof of anything, just as a tool ready for the next time it might be needed. Maggie found her out there that evening, running a hand along the patched sideboard of the box. "You knew," Maggie said, "before any of this. You knew the addy would bog and the tractor wouldn't clear that draw, and the sled would be the only thing that'd get through." "Didn't know for certain," Clara said. "Just knew it happens most every hard winter somewhere on this place. Machines are good right up until the one day they're not, and calving season's usually the day that finds out." All these years, just for that one day, kept it because a tool doesn't have to be new to be ready. Clara set the strap down and looked out toward the north pasture, quiet under a fresh skin of snow, the windbreak dark against the white. Wyatt built that thing back before any of us had four-wheel drive worth trusting. Ground hasn't changed since, snow hasn't changed, cows haven't changed. Only thing that's changed is what folks trust to get the job done, and mostly that's fine, right up until it isn't. Maggie was quiet a moment, turning it over. It wasn't about getting there fast at all, was it? It was about getting back. Any of the trucks could have made it out there eventually, dug through, chained up something. The part nobody had an answer for was coming back with a wet calf that couldn't wait for a machine to get unstuck. "That's the part," Clara said. "In weather like this, steady beats strong." 3 weeks later, with the last of the calves on the ground, And the worst of the season behind them, another storm system showed up on the weather radio, moving down the same path as the last one, promising the same wind and the same cold. Maggie heard the forecast over breakfast and didn't say anything, just got up and walked out to the calving shed on her own, knelt down and checked the straw in the bottom of the old red sled herself, running her thumb along the runner, the way she'd watched Clara do it, making sure the rope was coiled loose and ready by the door. She didn't need Clara to tell her why anymore.